So let's move on to a review of the nitrogen cycle. See if you can match these up correctly before we go over it. So you should pause. Okay, welcome back. So if you said nitrification is the process, well, let's start from the beginning. Nitrogen fixation is where nitrogen gas from the atmosphere is turned into what we call ammonia or ammonia ions. And then those ammonia ions are converted into nitrates, and that's called nitrification. And to complete the cycle, nitrates are converted back to N2 into the atmosphere, and that's called denitrification. So let's see that in the next slide. All right, so in this video, in this slide, we're going to take a look at the nitrogen cycle. So nitrogen gas is all around us in the form that we call N2, 78% of the atmosphere. And in order to make it available for organisms, it has to be converted into other forms, specifically nitrates. So the first step in this is called nitrogen fixation. And that's, as we can see, when the N2 goes to ammonia, NH4. And this happens by two ways. One way is by lightning. And the lightning has enough energy to split apart the N2 molecule and make it react with components in the air. But it also happens by specialized bacteria called rhizobium, or rhizobia for plural, bacteria. And these bacteria live on the roots of legume plants. On roots of legume plants. And a legume would be like beans, dry beans, pinto beans, etc. Let me see if I can write that a little more clearly. Legume plants. Okay, so one way you can help to fertilize your soil is have a growing season of legume plants in between your other plants, or in between your other seasons. Okay, so common misconception, people sometimes think that it's legume plants that are doing the nitrogen fixation, but no, it's the bacteria living on their roots. Okay, but that's not enough. We have to go one step further. So the next step is for that ammonia to then be converted into nitrates, and this step is called nitrification. And it is also done by specialized bacteria. I'm not going to just say bacteria, I'm going to say specialized bacteria, because not all bacteria do these kinds of functions. And generally, it's different bacteria that do nitrification compared to the ones that do nitrogen fixation. Once it's in the form of nitrates, then we can have what happens called uptake, where the plants take it up into the roots. And then what we call assimilation, which means they actually use what they uptake and make it become part of them. And when animals eat the plants, now those nutrients go into the animals. Eventually both the plants and the animals die and decompose. And in that process of decomposing, we have these nitrates going back into ammonia. And this step is called ammonification. Ammonification. Ultimately, in order to make this cycle complete, we have to have some way of reforming the nitrogen gas. Otherwise, over time, it would deplete. And so there are still other bacteria that do the step called denitrification. And so we will say again by specialized bacteria. Okay, and thus completes the process. Now, this is how nature does it, but we have learned how to synthesize ammonia from nitrogen gas in the atmosphere. We learned how to do that in the early 1900s, and that has allowed us to make synthetic fertilizers. If you go to a store and buy Miracle-Gro, it contains synthetic nitrates, and you put them in your soil, and your plants are very happy because they need those nitrates, they uptake it. But in doing so, we are taking too much N2 out of the atmosphere and putting it into too much nitrates, which have the effects of creating algae blooms, and with the algae blooms, you eventually get too much algae growth, and then when that dies, the decomposers eat it up too quickly, and in doing so, they use up the oxygen. So we have that process that we call eutrophication, making the waters have too many nitrates, too many nutrients, too good for plant growth, and that ultimately leads in hypoxia, a drop in dissolved oxygen, creating dead zones. Okay, so that's what I want to go over with a nitrogen cycle. Here's our textbook's version of the drawing of the nitrogen cycle. I guess one thing that I'll just point out here is that this process is also happening here in the ocean by different bacteria, but ultimately the same process is